We've seen the Divine in Divine Lightning Radiance, so let's look at the Radiance part of this set. Praise the sun!
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the set review of VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance. Last time we already tackled the new cards for Ancient Feathers with Gabriel, so this time we're gonna dive straight into the cards for Gold Paladin with their new GRL boss unit, Gurguit, as well as some support for the Bluish Flames, which is pretty exciting. And we also got some little snippets here for Ezel as well as for Agravain. So with that said, let's jump straight into these cards, and we of course are going to begin with the reprints and the triggers. And Gold Paladin, just like any other set and any other clan, they got two new reprint triggers, and that's the critical and one of their front triggers. And both of them are going to be just 1 star, so just generic reprints. They also got a new heal trigger, which is Sage Who Goes Ahead, pay run, and this is going to be just a 1 star as we already have access to a heal trigger. Now they also got a new draw trigger, which was their old stand trigger, which is of course Player of the Holy Pipe Gary. And this is going to be a 3 star as this is a new draw trigger in the lineup, and this just opens up more option for their triggers. Now of course they also got access to their new Sentinel critical trigger, and this time for them that's Scarface Lion. And just like all the other ones, it's going to be a 5 star as it opens up more options in deck building. Now they also got a new starter, which is their old starter Knight of Early Dawn Coel, but it's once again a 1 star as it's just a generic starter. And crazy enough, Gold Paladin didn't get 1 new vanilla, but they got 2 new vanillas, and one of those is this grade 1 Spagel, which is the 15k shield grade 1. And it's just going to be a 1 star as I'm not really a fan of these type of cards. Now the second vanilla they got is the 12k grade 2 vanilla, and that is Holy Mage Indolf. And once again, it's 1 star as the grade 1 was only defensive, this is only offensive, but Gurguit wants units that is both. So it's not really that great. So yeah, 1 star. Now with that said, let's jump straight into the generic support. And the first card that we see is the 7k grade 1, which is Converge Archer Abyss Scott. And its ability is act on rearguard circle once a turn, cost counter +1 and soul +1. Look at the 3 cards from the top of your deck, call a card from among them to the rearguard circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, I am not a fan of this card, and it's going to be a 1 star. Yes, it's a main phase act ability superior call card, so it could give you more shots unlike other cards that are mostly unplaced. But the problem is, it's way overcosted, and it's also on a 7k grade 1 body, which isn't great. So I'm not a fan of this skill, and I probably do not really see actual value of running this card. You might give it a go, but I would advise against it. Now another grade 1, which is pretty generic, but could be really useful for Agravain, is Knight of Illumination, Muir. And Muir has the ability Auto on Rearguard Circle. When placed by a card's ability, cost Soul +1, and this unit gets power +10k until the end of turn. So it can be a 17k beater or booster, whatever. Now this can be really nice for Agravain, as Agravain is all about the multi-attacking, and you're probably going to superior call with Agravain's skill, and paying the soul is no problem for Agravain, and having an access to a 22k beater can help you to overcome certain defensive triggers, so it could be useful. But overall it's not amazing, and it forcefully needs to require to be superior called by other units, so it might not be as useful outside of an Agravain engine. So with that in mind, I can only give it a 2 star card. Might be useful for certain strategies, but definitely not for everyone. Now another generic card that's quite questionable is this grade 2, which is Knight of Beloved Day, Kufret. And Kufret has the ability, continues a rearguard circle. If you call 2 or more cards from your deck this turn, this unit gets power +10k. So it requires you to put in resources by superior calling multiple cards to the field, and then it gains an extra 10k power. But it's on an 8k body, so it already isn't really a good unit, and even with the 10k power, it doesn't become a great unit. So I don't really know the value of this card, and I can only give it a 1 star as I just don't think it's good at all. Now another grade 2, which is actually pretty interesting, is this grade 2 Knight of Benefits, Berengaria. And Berengaria has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed by a card's ability, perform one of the effects below. Cost, Counter +1 and Soul Charge 1. Or cost, Soul +1 and Counter Charge 1. So if you superior call her, you can either turn a Counter Blast into a Soul Charge, or you can turn a Soul into a Counter Charge. That's actually pretty good, and probably the Soul Blast to Counter Charge is the more important part here, as Counter Blast is usually the more restraining resources. But in some cases, Soul could also be an issue and Counterblast couldn't. This is a nice way to add even more resource engines within your deck, and you might have space for 1 or 2 copies of a card like this. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's not game-changing, it's not amazing, but it's really nice to have such a card in Gold Paladin, as it can find its way in any type of build if they might need it 1 or 2 extra resource points, and they could lose the other ones in the process. Another very questionable card is this Grade 3 Planari Ray Dragon. And its ability is continuous effect at the rearguard circle. During the battle it attacked, if you have 5 or more rear guards, when your opponent would call a card from their hand to the guardian circle, he or she must call 2 or more at the same time. So if you have an almost filled field, you get the Battle Door effect. Yeah, this is pretty bad. This is a 1-star. This type of skill is pretty outdated nowadays, and its condition is quite annoying. And Gold Paladin already has a promo card, the turtle, that has a Battledore skill, which is a little bit easier to fulfill. So I don't really see the value of a card like this. Now, another Grade 3, which is actually pretty interesting, as you could say it was built for Gurguit, but this can actually work in other decks like Agravain, for example, as we have Flywheel Knight Edmund. And Edmund has the ability, Auto Guardian Circle, when placed, if your Vanguard is Grade 3 or greater, this unit gets shield plus 10k until the end of turn. So it effectively becomes a 10k shield just like a Grade 1. That's pretty good because that suddenly gives your Grade 3s shield value, so your total shield value of your deck will jump up quite a bit. But then we also has a second ability, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, put another rearguard into your soul, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the battle. At the end of the battle, return this unit to your hand. This is actually pretty incredible for something like Agravain, and is somewhat useful in other decks. The reason why it's somewhat useful for other decks is because you can still use this as an attacker while not sacrificing the shield value, as you can just attack with it and then put something into the soul. It also gives you potential resource for other skills, and it's a 22k beater that then goes to your hand, which you can use as a guard shield the next turn. But in Agravain, this is pretty good because in Agravain, all your units are going to the soul anyways. So using this mid-battle in your first wave of attacks and shoving something else in the soul actually doesn't lose you on resources at all, but you get this card back and that unit becomes 10k stronger, so it can basically becomes better against defensive triggers. And you can then use it next turn to call it again from hand, thus increasing the call count from Agravain. But on top of that, if you superior call this card off of Agravain, you actually get a plus because you can put one of the other units into the soul that you also superior call and then bounce this card back to your hand, and suddenly you have an extra card in hand after you resolve Agravain's skill, which isn't usually what happens. So that's actually pretty good, and with that in mind, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's pretty versatile, it has some application, it's definitely not for every build, but I think there's quite a lot of value to be found and to be had with this card. So I don't think you should underestimate what this card can do. Now, another Grade 3 that's again a bit questionable is this Grade 3 Battalion Lance Dragon. And its ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed by a card's ability, discard 2 cards from your hand, and this unit gets power plus 20k, critical plus 1 until the end of turn. So this card is somewhat similar to the Nubatama Grade 3 that also forces you to discard cards to gain power in a critical, and both of them have the issue that they don't get the Sentinel Restrict, so if your opponent can just Perfect Guard it, it negates those 2 discards you did. And that's not great. But on top of that, it also needs to specifically be called with a special effect to even get this ability in the first place, so it's quite restrictive. Granted, I do see the value to some extent to a 32k beater with double critical, which can be 37 or 42 depending if it's on an Excel circle. So I want to give it 2 stars, as if you already been bombarding them with multi-attacks and then suddenly this card comes out at the end, then yeah, it can be a death sentence since they didn't prepare for a card like this. So if this suddenly comes out of a multi-attack pattern with Gurguit, or it comes out of the back of an Agravain, then it might surprise them a bit and they might not have the Perfect Guard anymore and suddenly they die out of nowhere because of this fact. But I don't think it's as consistent and useful as most of those cards. So that's why I am only going to give it 2 stars. Now, for the final generic support card, that's of course the Grade 3 Searcher, which for Gold Paladin is Dawning Knight Gorbaduk, and its ability to gain the 5k power is continuous Vanguard Rearguard Circle. During a turn, if you call 2 or more rearguards this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k. Hey, Unite makes its return to standard. Now, of course, this is pretty easy to fulfill, and therefore it's a solid 5-star card because it also has a generic Great Researcher and it's a pretty good 13k booster or beater. And can also be really nice for Agravain, as it means they have another great unit that gains a little bit more power while it's also using the multi-tech shenanigans. Now, once we strive away from the generic stuff, we see some archetype or some combo-heavy cards, and one of those cards is a new card for Ezel, as we have Knight of Inspiration, Lulak. And its abilities are on a Vanguard circle, when placed, cost discard a card from your hand and draw a card. Very generic, we've seen this time and time again. But its unique abilities on a Vanguard circle, when your grade 3 Vanguard is placed during your main phase, cost put this unit into your soul and countercharge 1. Now, the reason why I say this is Ezel support, because only Ezel can fulfill this condition, because it specifically states main phase. So even Paladin doesn't work because that's battle phase. Now, Ezel can activate this card 2 ways. They can either go into Blonde Ezel during their Superior Ride shenanigans, or they can Superior Ride into Ravenhair Ezel. And that is where this card actually synergizes the best, because Ravenhair costs a counterblast to Superior Ride it from hand. And it also has a counterblast skill to give it the extra power and the Sentinel Restrict, so your opponent will probably waste a lot of card value or they're going to take a lot of damage. And you want to go into him as consistently as possible, because that means you'll always have a second turn Platina Ezel. So with the fact that you now have a countercharger that falls specifically in between that, you can actually do the entire power play with only one counterblast, as you can call this thing right into Ezel, or already sit on Ezel, call this thing, then Superior Ride into Ravenhair Ezel for the counterblast 1, immediately use the skill to countercharge and you get 1 soul, and then use the counterblast again to get that extra pressure onto your Ravenhair for that first grade 3 turn, while your opponent is probably still grade 2 or maybe even grade 1. So with it in mind, I think it's a pretty decent card. I will only give it 2 stars though, because it is really restricted to a specific scenario. Because after you do that play and you go, let's say, into a Ravenhair, this card does absolutely nothing. And your opponent can still deny you even value out of this card, because they also just can give you 0 counterblast and you cannot even go into Ravenhair, and then you don't really have any value of this card. So that's the reason why I want to give it 2 stars, because it can work its magic in the right circumstances, but that is very marginable in the grand scheme of what the Ezel deck actually does. Now, with the Ezel card out of the way, let's talk about a duo of very surprising cards, because the Bluish Flames returns. And the first one that we're going to talk about is the grade 2 of this duo, which is Oath Liberator Agloville. And Agloville has the ability on a Vanguard circle, when placed, cost counterblast 1, look at the 3 cards from the top of your deck, call up to 1 card from among them to the Vanguard circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So it's a very generic +1 if you write it, which is pretty good, as it's pretty cheap in comparison to the other grade 2s that can do the same thing. But it also has a second ability which is pretty good, as that's on a Vanguard circle. When it attacks, cost put another Vanguard into the soul, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the battle. At the end of the battle, return this unit to your hand. So this is the exact same skill that we discussed on the grade 3, but now it's on the grade 2, and that makes it all the more better, because it means it can fit in any deck, as you'll probably have room for a grade 2 in whatever engine. And the fact that you can call it back is pretty nice, because it then can synergize with other things. A good example is, of course, Agravain, because that means you have a unit to call every single turn, and the same value of it being superior called off of the Agravain to then get another plus still applies to this card as it does for the grade 3. But this card is even better because it synergizes with the grade 3 of this duo, which can potentially search this card out from the deck and give you more value. So overall, I think it's a solid 4-star card because it's an excellent ride target, but it's also a really solid beater on the side in whatever engine you might play. Now, the grade 3 that finished this package is this grade 3 Bluish Flame Liberator Percival. And Percival has the abilities Continuous Vanguard Circle. All of your units on the additional Vanguard Circles get power plus 5k. So it basically turns Exel 2 into Exel 1, so you never have to choose between Exel 1 and Exel 2, because Exel 2 is basically both. That said, Exel 1 becomes Exel 1 Plus, because they give plus 15k to the units. But that's not the reason why you would play this card. The reason why you would play this card is because of its following ability, which is Auto Vanguard the Vanguard Circle. When placed, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, cost counterblast 1, and discard a card from your hand. Get an imaginary gift Excel, which basically compensates the discard, Search your deck or drop zone for up to 1 over-liberated Agravain, call to the rearguard circle, and if you search your deck, shuffle your deck. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. This skill is nuts, because it basically gives you an extra circle a turn earlier. So on your first grade 3 turn, you can have 2 extra circles, which for Gold Paladin is huge because they can easily swarm the board. So if the more extra circles they have, the more pressure they can apply right out of the get-go. So for something like Agravain, that is good because you can call more units to those extra circles, which gives them more power so you can beat over defensive triggers. And for something like Gurguit, this is insane because they get even more value out of it. But on top of that, you don't only create this extra circle, you also get the superior call unit from your deck, so you filter your deck, and that unit can immediately be called to that new created extra circles, so you aren't even forced to call over on top of other units, or basically sacrifice spots that might have been used for other specific cards. So that's actually pretty damn good, and the unit that you superior call out of it is Agravain, which is a pretty good beater that can give you even more card advantage over time, because you can just shove this grade 3 into the soul after it's done its thing and then bounce the Agravain back while creating a 24k attacker, which is pretty good. So with it in mind how generic this engine is, because it's just a 2-card combo, I think it's a solid 5-star card. Percival can easily find its way in any type of Gold Paladin deck that might see some use in creating more extra circles a turn earlier, while also filtering its deck for a powerful beater. So I think it's pretty granted that this card is a solid 5-star card, because unlike all the other archetypes that we've seen in previous set reviews from the previous sets, most of them have kind of archetype restriction. This card doesn't. So it's pretty good. Now with the Bluish Flame we can go into the main bulk of this set, which are the Gurguit support cards, and those are actually only 3 cards because most of the Gold Paladin support is pretty generic like usual, but it has to do with the fact that Gurguit is actually also pretty generic. So let's talk about this young knight and see what this Sunrise Ray Knight can do for the clan. As here we have Sunrise Ray Knight Gurguit, and its abilities are continuous Vanguard circle during your turn. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this unit and all of your units placed by a card's ability this turn gets power plus 5k for each of your additional rearguard circles. So every superior called unit gets free power for doing absolutely nothing. That's really good because it allows you to hit over defensive triggers. But this showcases its interaction with Percival, because Percival can allow you to create a 1 extra circle a turn earlier, giving all your superior call units an extra 10k power. And because Percival also superior calls a unit, aka Agravain, meaning that Agravain gets a total of 25k extra power as you call to the extra circle, it gets 10k of Gurguit and it gets 10k of himself, which is a pretty sick meter you're getting onto the board effectively for free. But that's just the beginning part of Gurguit, because Gurgit's main value lies in its second ability, or basically said its main ability, which is auto and Vanguard circle once a turn. When it attacks or is attacked, cost count plus 1, look at the 5 cards from the top of your deck, call the 2 cards from among them to the rearguard circle and shuffle your deck. If it is your opponent's turn, call them to the Guardian circle instead of the rearguard circle. So this card, for 1 counterblast, allows you to generate 2 more attacks. That's 2 extra multi-attacks you're getting, and you can call them to the rearguard circle, to those extra circles, which is pretty good. But on top of that, it can also just superior call Guardians to the field during your opponent's turn, which can help you effectively guard very efficiently in whatever scenario you might find yourself. Because this effect can help you overcome nasty guard restrictions that certain builds might put up against you. Like you cannot guard with Sentinels, or you cannot guard with Triggers, or maybe you cannot guard with multiple grades like Nubatama is very known for with Mizikaze, for example. This card can combat those scenarios quite effectively and give Gurguit multiple ways to play its deck out. You can be very aggressive with your multi-attacks during your turn, or you can be very defensive and tanky during your opponent's turn if you want to just outlast them a bit. This gives Gurguit a lot of flexibility and makes it one of the strongest decks that comes out of this set, and also in the meta at the time that this set released, because of the power and the flexibility this deck generates. But to get a better understanding, let's talk about its two supporting cards that fulfills the roles within this offensive-defensive playstyle, and then come back to Gurguit and see all the crazy interaction it provides, because there are a lot of interesting things we can do. So the first of these support cards is of course the Great One Sunshine Knight Jeffrey, and it has the ability on a Vanguard circle, when placed, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal the one Sunrise Ray Knight Gurguit or Knight of Spring Light Paramore from among them, put them in your hand and shuffle your deck. This is something we see time and time again in these Grade 1 archetype searchers that can check top 7 for 2 specific cards. Nothing really special about it. But its unique skill is Continuous Regret and Guardian Circle. When placed by a card's ability, this unit gets power plus 5k, shield plus 5k until the end of turn. So it works with any deck as it becomes a 13k attack or booster, so that can be really nice. But in Gurguit's case, it is even better, because if you call it with Gurguit, it either gets the 5k power, or we can benefit from the extra 5k shield, which turns it into a 15k Guardian. Which is pretty good, as that compares itself to a critical trigger, which are one of your strongest Guardian options that you have in your generic sense of guarding. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's a generic consistency booster, and the fact that it gets an extra little power or shield can help the deck. The only problem is that its shield application is a bit inconsistent, as it needs to be in the top 5 once you use Gurguit's skills. There aren't really any other ways to get it superior call to the Guardian Circle with other skills. Maybe we get more in the future, but sadly that's not the case right now. Now the grade 2 for Gurguit is of course Knight of Spring's Light Paramore, and its ability is act on Vanguard or Regret Circle. Once per turn, cost counter +1, and call a grade 2 or less card from your hand to the Regret Circle and draw a card. So this is a card that falls in the line of Sagramore and the other cards that allows you to spear call cards from your hand. But the interesting part about this card is that it's a act ability, so you don't have to call it every single turn to activate its effect, and you draw the card back. So effectively, it's a cycle effect, but honestly, it's a plus effect because you get the card to the field. And certain cards want to be superior called to get their effect off, like Dindrain for example. So this card can synergize with those cards while also generating more value, which is pretty good. But it also synergizes with Gurguit, because Gurguit wants every unit to be superior called, so they gain the additional 10k, 5k, 15k, 20k power for every Axel circle that you might have. So this card synergizes really nicely with that aspect, while also synergizing with the generic cards within Gold Paladin like Dindrain. But it also has the same second effect like Jeffrey, which is auto Regret Circle and Guardian Circle. When placed by a card's ability, this unit gets power plus 5k and shield plus 5k until the end of turn. So it can be a 14k attacker if it's superior called, or it can be a 10k Guardian, which puts us on par like grade 1. This for me is a solid 4-star card because it's once again one of those superior callers. It is pretty good within Gold Paladin as it allows you to call out specific cards that wants to be called out, like Dindrain, and while it does that, it's a draw engine, and it synergizes also really nicely with Gurguit with its mechanic. Now that we've seen all the cards within this archetype, let's look back at Gurguit and understand how powerful Gurguit actually is. So its first ability gives us a lot of free power onto the board. We have multiple cards within Gold Paladin that can easily help us fulfill this condition. We of course have Paramore within this support, and we have Percival with Agravain that can help us, and we have some other generic cards, but those are the main bulk that you're going to use. But in the previous support wave, we've got cards like Sagramore that can help us fill more cards onto the board. Or we have one of the other grade 2 superior callers like Kahaden, for example, or Vivian, or maybe Aphels that can help us to superior call more and more cards onto the board. But the main attraction of Gurguit lies in its second ability, which allows it to superior call units to the Guardian Circle or the field. Now for the Guardian Circle, it is great to circumvent certain guard restrict. You can superior call Paramore and Jeffrey to get more shield than normal, but it can also cheat out Perfect Guards in circumstances that we couldn't call Perfect Guards, because the V-era Perfect Guards don't really care if they're called from hand or not, so we can still get that Perfect Guard off even if our opponent has a guard restrict that negates Perfect Guards. But the more crazy part about this card is the fact that we've got cards in this set that can activate their ability when they're placed without needing to be placed from hand. So if Gurguit superior calls those units during mid-battle, that means we can even extend even further beyond that and get more attacks. Because we can attack with the entire board, attack with Gurguit, use his ability to superior call 2 units. If one of those units is Percival, we can then activate Percival to generate another Axel Circle and to superior call an Aglaville, while we already superior called those other 2 units, creating free attacks, but because we also get that extra Ezel circles, those units get an additional 5k power, which is pretty nuts if you put that all together. And there are even more cards that synergize in this interaction, because all those cards that we use to synergize with Agravain, that allows us to get more calls, those same cards will work with Gurguit, as it's effectively the same scenario. But Gurguit gives them even more power beyond that. So Gurguit is a solid 5-star card. This deck is going to be one of the strongest decks that come out of this set. And it's probably on par with Luart. The other deck that's going to come out of this set that can compete with Gurguit to some extent, because it's somewhat of its counter, is Vanquisher. So my advice is to not overlook this card. And probably you aren't. You're probably well aware of how strong Gurguit is, but it is ridiculous the value you can generate out of this card. And with that, we've seen all the new cards for Gold Paladin. Of course, the main spotlight or sunlight that goes to Gurguit with its couple of support cards around it, as well as all the extra engine pieces that fall in its engine, like the Bluish Flame Liberators, which are also pretty generic. But besides the Gurguit support cards, we got a lot of generic support that can work even with Agravain, and maybe we can even work something out for Ezel, as we also get that extra special card for Ezel. So honestly, this set was perfect for any Gold Paladin player out there. Might they be Gurguit fanboys, Ezel supporters, or Agravain enthusiasts. It doesn't really matter. Whatever type of Gold Paladin player you were, you could get your fill with this particular set. And with that, let me know in the comments down below what you think of these new cards for Gold Paladin. Which cards are you the most excited for? Which deck do you want to build straight out of VBT 12, Divine Lightning Radiance? So let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below about this new set wave for Gold Paladin. This video has been brought to you by our lovely Patreons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one!